Tonight, you'll step inside the smoky workshop of one of medieval Europe's most essential people, a man whose hands shaped everything from horseshoes to swords. But behind the glowing fire and ringing hammer was a life filled with exhausting labor, dangerous heat, and surprising respect. As the village slowly falls asleep, you'll discover what it truly meant to spend every day beside a blazing forge, and why a single mistake could ruin weeks of work. Dim the lights, settle into a comfortable place, and allow your mind to wander back nearly 800 years. Tonight, we'll leave behind the noise of the modern world and quietly enter a peaceful medieval village, where the rhythmic sound of hammer striking iron echoes softly through the morning mist. Together, we'll follow the slow, fascinating life of the village blacksmith, a craftsman whose work quietly shaped every corner of medieval life. There's no rush here. Just gentle stories, curious history, and a calm journey into the past. Imagine arriving in a quiet medieval village just as the first pale light of dawn begins to spread across the sky. Thin curls of smoke rise gently from small cottages with thatched roofs. Chickens scratch at the dirt paths, and sleepy villagers prepare for another long day of work. The air is cool, carrying the earthy scent of damp grass and wood smoke. Everything seems peaceful, almost still, but then you hear it. A steady, rhythmic sound echoes across the village. Clang, 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 the sound of iron meeting iron. Without even looking, every villager knows exactly where it is coming from. The blacksmith is already awake. Long before the baker places bread into the oven or the farmer walks toward his fields, the blacksmith has already begun his work. His forge is alive with glowing fire, and sparks dance through the air like tiny orange stars. In many ways, this humble workshop is the beating heart of the entire village. Today, it may seem surprising that one craftsman could be so important. After all, he wasn't a king, a knight, or a wealthy merchant. He rarely wore expensive clothing or lived in a grand house, yet almost every person in the village depended on him. If a farmer's plow broke, the blacksmith repaired it. If a horse lost a horseshoe, the blacksmith made another. If someone needed a kitchen knife, a cooking hook, a door hinge, or even a simple nail, they visited the forge. Without his work, daily life would slowly come to a halt. As the fire crackles inside the forge, the blacksmith carefully prepares for another demanding day. The forge itself is much more than a fireplace. It is a specially built furnace designed to heat iron until it glows bright orange or even yellow. At these temperatures, the hard metal becomes soft enough to shape with careful hammer blows. Keeping that fire hot requires constant effort. Beside the flames stands a large pair of bellows, usually made from thick leather stretched over wooden frames. Every few moments, the blacksmith pulls the handles back and forth. Each movement forces fresh air into the fire, making the coals burn hotter and brighter. Without the bellows, the fire would cool too quickly. Without enough heat, the iron would refuse to bend. The bellows almost seem to breathe like a giant sleeping animal, filling the workshop with a slow, steady rhythm that continues throughout the day. Nearby sits the anvil. It may not look impressive at first glance, a heavy block of solid iron with a smooth, flat top, but it is one of the most valuable tools the blacksmith owns. Nearly every piece of metal will be placed upon its surface before the day's work is done. When the glowing iron is lifted from the fire with long metal tongs, it is carried carefully to the anvil. Then comes the familiar music of the forge, clang, clang, clang. Each strike is deliberate. Too hard and the metal may crack, too soft and it won't take the proper shape. The blacksmith has spent years learning exactly how much force to use, relying not only on his eyes but also on the sound of each hammer blow. Experienced craftsmen could often hear whether a piece of iron was cooling too quickly or shaping correctly simply by listening. Iron itself is a remarkable material. Although it appears cold and unchanging, it transforms completely inside the fire. What begins as a stiff, dark bar becomes glowing, flexible, and almost alive under the blacksmith's skilled hands. Yet working with iron is never easy. It is heavy, it is stubborn, and it demands patience. Every tool, every horseshoe, every cooking pot hook, Every farming blade begins as a simple piece of iron that must be heated, hammered, cooled, and sometimes heated all over again. This careful process can take hours, sometimes an entire day, sometimes even longer. One mistake at the wrong moment can undo all that hard work. Despite these challenges, the village depends on the blacksmith more than almost anyone else. In fact, here's something many people find surprising. A skilled blacksmith often earned more money than an ordinary farmer. At first, this may sound impossible. After all, farmers produced food, and everyone needs food to survive. But farming was common. Almost every family worked the land in some way. Blacksmithing was completely different. It required years of training, expensive tools, a permanent workshop, access to quality iron, and an understanding of heat and metal that few people possessed. A good blacksmith couldn't simply be replaced overnight. His skills were rare, and rare skills were valuable. Villagers willingly paid for strong tools that lasted many years because better tools meant larger harvests, healthier animals, and safer homes. Even local lords and wealthy landowners relied on talented blacksmiths to maintain wagons, gates, locks, and farming equipment across their estates. When knights passed through the village, they too often stopped at the forge, not always for swords. More often, they needed horseshoes replaced, damaged armor repaired, or broken equipment fixed before continuing their journey. The forge welcomed everyone: farmers, travelers, merchants, carpenters, hunters. Even children sometimes watched from a safe distance, fascinated by the glowing fire and flying sparks to them. The blacksmith almost seemed like a magician, transforming hard stone-like metal into useful objects with nothing more than fire, patience, and careful hands. But behind that impressive skill lay a life filled with endless labor, intense heat, aching muscles, and constant danger. Because becoming a blacksmith was never easy. Imagine that the village is still wrapped in darkness. The stars have not yet faded, and a cool mist hangs over the fields. Most people are still asleep beneath thick wool blankets, but one small building near the center of the village is already showing signs of life. A faint orange glow flickers through its doorway. The blacksmith's day has begun. There are no clocks to wake him, no alarm bells or buzzing phones. Instead, years of routine have trained his body to rise long before sunrise. Every morning begins the same way, because fire cannot wait for a lazy start. The first task is always to prepare the forge. Yesterday's ashes are carefully swept aside, making room for fresh charcoal. Unlike ordinary firewood, charcoal burns hotter and cleaner, producing the intense heat needed to soften stubborn iron. Bags of charcoal sit stacked in one corner of the workshop, protected from rain, because damp fuel would struggle to burn properly. The blacksmith kneels beside the forge and arranges the charcoal with practiced hands. A small flame is lit, and at first it burns quietly, almost timidly. But the fire is not hot enough yet. He reaches for the large leather bellows. With slow, steady movements, he pulls and pushes the handles. Each breath of air feeds the growing flames. The fire brightens from a dull red to a glowing orange, then slowly becomes bright yellow in its hottest center. Soon, the workshop begins to warm. The cool morning air disappears, replaced by waves of dry heat that spread across the room. The smell is unmistakable: hot charcoal, warm iron, burning wood, and a faint scent of smoke that clings to every beam of the old wooden roof. Now the real work can begin. A long bar of iron is placed deep inside the glowing coals. It does not change immediately. The blacksmith waits patiently, watching the color instead of the clock: dark gray, deep red, bright orange, finally almost yellow. Only then is the metal ready. Using heavy iron tongs, he carefully lifts the glowing piece onto the waiting anvil. The hammer rises high before falling with a familiar rhythm: clang, clang, clang. The sound rolls across the sleeping village. For many families, that ringing hammer is as dependable as the sunrise itself. Each strike changes the shape ever so slightly. The metal stretches, bends, flattens, or curves depending on what today's customer needs. The iron cools surprisingly quickly. Within only a minute or two, it becomes too hard to shape again. Back into the fire it goes. Again the bellows breathe life into the flames. Again the iron glows. Again the hammer sings. This cycle repeats hundreds of times during a single day. As dawn finally arrives, the first customers begin to appear. A farmer walks up carrying a broken plow blade over his shoulder. Without it, he cannot prepare his fields, and every lost day means a smaller harvest. Not long after, another farmer arrives leading a patient horse that has thrown one of its horseshoes. Fitting a horseshoe is more complicated than it may seem. Every horse has slightly different hooves, just as every person has different feet. The blacksmith carefully examines the hoof, shapes a new shoe while the iron is still glowing, cools it in water with a loud hiss of steam, and gently nails it into place using special horseshoe nails designed not to hurt the animal. A healthy horse was one of the most valuable possessions a family could own. Without strong horses, carts could not carry crops, merchants could not travel, and messages could not reach distant towns. One horse needed 4 perfectly fitted horseshoes, and those shoes wore out over time, meaning customers returned again and again throughout the year. Soon, the workshop grows busier. A carpenter needs fresh nails. A housewife wants a new cooking hook for the fireplace. A merchant brings a damaged lock that no longer works. A shepherd asks for a small knife to repair leather straps. The blacksmith rarely has a quiet day. Every visitor brings a different problem, and every solution requires patience, skill, and careful attention. The work is physically exhausting. The heavy hammer may weigh several kilograms, and it must be lifted thousands of times each week. Sweat forms on the blacksmith's forehead even during the coldest months of winter. Tiny sparks fly through the air, sometimes landing on his leather apron before fading away. Small burns are simply accepted as part of the job. Rough hands become covered with calluses. Strong arms grow even stronger. By the time the sun stands high above the village, the blacksmith has already completed more work than many people realize. And still, the day is only half over. Many people today imagine that a medieval blacksmith spent every day forging magnificent swords for brave knights. It is an image often seen in films and fantasy stories, a glowing blade emerging from the fire as sparks fly dramatically through the air. It is certainly an exciting picture, but history tells a much quieter story. In reality, most blacksmiths rarely made swords at all. Instead, they spent their days creating the ordinary objects that kept an entire village running. Their greatest achievements were not famous weapons displayed in castles, but simple tools used by ordinary people every single day. Imagine walking through a medieval home. The door opens on sturdy iron hinges. A simple iron latch keeps it closed during the night. A cooking pot hangs above the fireplace from an iron hook. A small knife rests beside a wooden bowl. Every one of these objects likely passed through the blacksmith's hands. Without realizing it, the villagers were surrounded by his work from morning until night. The same was true outside. Farmers relied on iron hoes to prepare the soil. Axes cut firewood for cooking and warmth. Shovels dug drainage ditches after heavy rain. Sickles harvested grain during late summer. Even the wheels of wagons often contained iron bands, helping them survive the rough and muddy roads between villages. Without these tools, everyday work became slower, harder, and sometimes impossible. One of the smallest objects the blacksmith made was also one of the most important, the humble iron nail. Today, nails are so common that we rarely notice them. You might find hundreds inside a single modern home. In the Middle Ages, however, every nail had to be made by hand. The blacksmith heated a thin piece of iron, stretched it carefully with repeated hammer blows, cut it to the correct length, and shaped a small head at one end. Then he repeated the process again. And again, sometimes hundreds of times. It was slow, patient work. Yet these tiny pieces of iron held together wooden doors, furniture, wagons, fences, barns, bridges, and even entire houses. Without nails, many buildings simply could not be constructed in the same way. It is easy to overlook something so small, but villages quietly depended on them every day. The blacksmith also repaired far more objects than he created. A cracked axe did not always need replacing. A broken hinge could often be strengthened. A bent plow could be straightened and sharpened. Iron was valuable, and wasting it was something few people could afford. Repairing old tools saved both time and money, making the blacksmith not only a maker of new things but also a careful keeper of old ones. His workshop became a place where worn-out objects received a second chance. As the seasons changed, so did the work. During spring, farmers hurried to prepare their fields, bringing plows and hoes that needed repair before planting began. Summer brought requests for sickles and harvesting tools. Autumn was filled with wagon repairs as crops were carried home. Winter offered a brief change of pace, though there was still plenty to do. Broken household items, cooking tools, locks, and fireplace equipment often arrived at the forge while farming slowed beneath the cold weather. There was never a season without work. Children sometimes paused outside the workshop, watching from a safe distance. The glowing fire fascinated them. The ringing hammer echoed through the streets. Each burst of orange spark seemed almost magical. Some wondered whether the blacksmith possessed secret knowledge hidden inside the flames. To young eyes, it looked impossible that a hard piece of dark iron could become soft enough to bend with only heat and careful hammering. But there was no magic, only years of experience. The blacksmith understood something that most villagers did not. He knew that every piece of iron behaved differently. Some became brittle if cooled too quickly. Others needed to be heated again and again before taking the desired shape. He watched the color of the glowing metal carefully. Bright orange, golden yellow, deep red. Each color revealed the temperature and told him exactly when to strike. His eyes became as important as his hands. His patience became just as valuable as his strength. Although kings and knights often appear in history books, it was skilled craftsmen like the village blacksmith who quietly built the world around them. Every repaired plow helped grow food. Every sharpened axe gathered firewood. Every iron hinge opened a family home. Every handmade nail held together the places where ordinary people lived their lives. The village may have admired brave soldiers and wealthy nobles, but day after day, it was the steady work of the blacksmith that allowed everyday life to continue, one careful hammer strike at a time. By the middle of the day, the forge has become almost unbearably hot. The fire burns brightly, the charcoal glows like a bed of tiny suns, and waves of heat fill every corner of the workshop. Outside, a gentle breeze may cool the village streets, but inside the forge, the air feels heavy and dry. For the blacksmith, this is simply another ordinary afternoon. His leather apron protects him from some of the flying sparks, but no amount of thick clothing can keep away the intense heat for long. Sweat runs down his face, soaking his shirt long before the day is over. His hands are rough, his arms ache from countless hammer blows, and his back grows stiff from standing for hours beside the anvil. It is difficult work, far more difficult than many people imagine. Every glowing piece of iron must be handled with complete concentration. One careless moment could mean a painful burn. Tiny sparks leap from the anvil with every strike, landing on boots, clothing, and sometimes even bare skin. Most blacksmiths carried small scars across their hands and forearms, quiet reminders of years spent working beside fire. Burns were common. Cuts were common. Even crushed fingers were not unusual when a heavy hammer missed its mark. Yet despite the danger, the work had to continue. Iron was not forgiving. Unlike wood or clay, it could not be shaped whenever the craftsman wished. Once removed from the fire, the glowing metal began cooling immediately. The blacksmith had only a short time to hammer it into the correct shape before it became too hard to move. If he waited too long, the iron would stubbornly resist every strike. Back into the fire it would go. Then the waiting would begin again. This endless rhythm demanded patience more than speed. A skilled blacksmith never rushed. He watched the color of the iron carefully, knowing that it revealed everything he needed to know. Bright yellow meant the metal was soft and ready. Orange suggested it was still workable. Deep red warned that time was running out. After years of practice, many masters hardly needed to touch the iron to understand it. They simply looked. Sometimes they even listened. The ringing sound of each hammer strike could tell an experienced blacksmith whether the metal was behaving as expected. One wrong decision could ruin hours of careful work. If the iron became too hot, it might weaken. If it cooled unevenly, tiny cracks could appear inside the metal, invisible at first but dangerous later. A farming tool might snap during harvest. A wagon part could break while carrying heavy supplies. Even a simple kitchen knife could become useless if it was not forged properly. Every object leaving the workshop carried the blacksmith's reputation with it. That is why quality mattered so much. Becoming capable of this work required years of learning. A young boy, sometimes no older than 12, might begin as an apprentice. Instead of making beautiful tools, his first responsibilities were much simpler. He swept the workshop floor. He carried water. He stacked charcoal. He pumped the heavy leather bellows hour after hour to keep the fire burning hot. At first, he was allowed only to watch. The master blacksmith rarely explained everything at once. Instead, the apprentice learned by observing every movement: how the hammer was held, how the iron changed color, how long it remained inside the fire, how firmly each strike landed upon the anvil. Every day became another lesson. Weeks turned into months. Months became years. Only after proving patience, discipline, and careful attention would the apprentice be trusted to shape small pieces of iron on his own. Even then, mistakes were expected. A bent nail, a cracked hinge, a poorly balanced hammer, each error became part of the learning process. In many parts of medieval Europe, an apprenticeship lasted around 7 years. 7 years of early mornings, 7 years of smoke and sweat, 7 years of listening to the steady music of hammer against anvil. Only after completing this long journey could a craftsman hope to become a master blacksmith with a workshop of his own. By then, he had learned something far more valuable than simply shaping iron. He had learned patience. Every successful blacksmith understood that strength alone was never enough. The strongest arms could not force cold iron to bend. Only careful timing, steady hands, and years of quiet experience could transform a stubborn piece of metal into something useful. And perhaps that is why villagers respected the blacksmith so deeply, not simply because he worked with fire, but because he had spent years mastering it, one careful hammer strike at a time. As evening slowly approaches, the forge begins to grow quieter. The busiest hours of the day have passed, and the last few customers make their way home carrying freshly repaired tools, sharpened blades, and newly fitted horseshoes. The steady ringing of the hammer becomes less frequent, replaced by the gentle crackling of glowing charcoal. It is a peaceful time to reflect on the many stories people have told about blacksmiths over the centuries. Some of those stories are true. Many are not. One of the most common myths is that blacksmiths spent nearly every day forging magnificent swords for knights and kings. It is an exciting image, and one that has appeared in countless books, paintings, and films. But the reality was much less dramatic. For most village blacksmiths, swords were only a tiny part of their work if they made them at all. Their days were filled with practical tasks: repairing broken plows, shaping horseshoes, making nails, fixing locks, crafting hinges, sharpening axes, and creating countless everyday tools that helped ordinary families live their lives. Without those simple objects, the village could not function. Another popular belief is that every blacksmith became wealthy because everyone depended on their skills. It sounds reasonable. After all, a skilled craftsman was always in demand. Yet life was often far from comfortable. Iron was expensive. Charcoal had to be purchased or produced. Tools wore out and needed replacing. During harsh winters or poor harvests, many villagers simply could not afford repairs immediately. Sometimes the blacksmith accepted payment in grain, firewood, eggs, cheese, or wool instead of coins. Money was not always part of the exchange. Like many craftsmen of the Middle Ages, the blacksmith worked hard for every reward he received. Another myth suggests that anyone with enough strength could become a blacksmith. Strong muscles certainly helped. Lifting heavy hammers and moving glowing iron demanded physical endurance. But strength alone was never enough. The true skill lay in understanding the metal itself, knowing exactly when to remove it from the fire, recognizing its temperature simply by its color, striking with precision instead of force, cooling it at exactly the right moment. These abilities took years to develop. No shortcut could replace experience. Perhaps the most fascinating belief of all was that blacksmiths possessed mysterious powers. To modern eyes, this may sound like simple superstition. But imagine living in a medieval village where very few people understood how iron behaved. You watch an ordinary man place a cold, dark piece of metal into blazing fire. Moments later, he removes it glowing like the setting sun. With only a hammer and steady hands, he transforms it into a useful tool before your very eyes. It would almost seem like magic. Some villagers believed the blacksmith understood secret forces hidden inside the flames. Others whispered that fire itself obeyed his commands. In certain parts of Europe, people even believed that iron forged by a skilled blacksmith could protect homes from evil spirits or bring good fortune to travelers. Horseshoes became especially connected with these beliefs. Today, many people still hang a horseshoe above a doorway for luck. That tradition stretches back hundreds of years. Although historians debate its exact origin, many medieval people believed iron possessed special protective qualities. A horseshoe, carefully crafted by the village blacksmith, became more than a practical object. It became a symbol of safety, prosperity, and hope. Of course, the blacksmith himself probably smiled quietly at many of these stories. He knew there was no magic hidden inside his forge, only careful observation, patient practice, endless repetition. Every successful tool was the result of experience rather than mystery. Every glowing piece of iron followed the same natural rules, whether it became a humble nail or a sturdy horseshoe. Still, the stories continued. Parents shared them with their children. Travelers carried them from village to village. And with every passing generation, the blacksmith became not only a respected craftsman, but also a legendary figure whose workshop seemed to stand somewhere between ordinary life and quiet wonder. As the final embers glow softly inside the forge, it becomes clear that the greatest mystery was never magic at all. It was the remarkable patience, dedication, and quiet skill of the people who spent their lives shaping cold iron into the countless simple objects that helped an entire medieval world keep turning. As the sun slowly disappears beyond the distant hills, a gentle golden light settles over the village. The busy sounds of the day begin to fade. Farmers return from their fields, children are called inside for supper, and the narrow dirt roads grow quieter with every passing moment. Inside the forge, the fire no longer roars as fiercely as it did in the morning. The glowing coals now shine with a soft orange light, breathing out their final warmth after a long day of hard work. For the first time since before sunrise, the blacksmith sets down his hammer. The familiar ringing sound that echoed through the village all day finally comes to an end. Silence slowly takes its place. He carefully places the finished tools where they will be collected tomorrow. A sharpened axe rests beside the doorway. Fresh horseshoes hang neatly on the wall. A handful of handmade nails waits in a small wooden box. Every object tells the story of patient hands and countless careful hammer strikes. The anvil, warm from hours of work, now stands quietly in the fading light. The bellows no longer breathe life into the fire. The smoke drifting from the chimney becomes thinner and thinner until it almost disappears into the evening sky. Outside, horses settle into their stables. A dog curls up beside a cottage door. Soft candlelight begins to glow through tiny windows across the village. Somewhere nearby, a mother quietly tells her children a bedtime story. The peaceful sounds of the countryside slowly replace the noise of the workshop. Crickets begin their nightly song. An owl calls from a distant tree. A cool breeze carries away the last traces of heat from the forge. The blacksmith looks around his workshop one final time before closing the heavy wooden door. Tomorrow will begin exactly as today did. Before sunrise, the fire will burn once again. The bellows will breathe. The hammer will sing. New tools will be shaped. Old tools will be repaired. Life in the village will continue, just as it has for generations. Most people will never remember the name of the blacksmith who made their plow stronger or repaired the shoe of their faithful horse. History often remembers kings, queens, and great battles, but ordinary craftsmen quietly built the world those famous people lived in. every sturdy wagon that carried food to market, every strong gate protecting a family home, every iron hinge opening a wooden door, every cooking hook hanging above a warm fireplace, every horseshoe carrying travelers safely along muddy roads. Each one began as a simple piece of iron resting inside the glowing heart of a village forge. Perhaps that is the quiet beauty of history. The greatest changes are not always made by the loudest voices or the richest people. Sometimes they are made by ordinary hands, working patiently, day after day, asking for little more than enough fire, enough time, and the chance to do honest work well. As night fully settles over the medieval village, the forge grows dark. Only a few tiny red embers remain, glowing softly before fading into the darkness. The village falls asleep. The fields become still. The stars shine quietly above the rooftops, just as they have for countless centuries. And somewhere in the peaceful silence, tomorrow's work patiently waits for another sunrise. Thank you for joining tonight's journey into the quiet life of a medieval blacksmith. I hope these gentle stories have carried you far away from the worries of today and into the calm rhythm of another time. Now, let your thoughts drift as peacefully as the last wisps of smoke rising from the sleeping forge. Close your eyes, relax, and allow history to slowly fade into pleasant dreams. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next chapter of history.